Chapter 1865. Is that so? Xiao Yijuan asked with a faint smile. Yes, absolutely. Feng Yu answered seriously, but her heart was full of resentment. If Jing Yu and Brother Ling found out about this, she would be dead for sure. Therefore, she could not let Jing Yu know about this. Are you going to agree or not? Feng Yu had been waiting for a long time, but Xiao Yijuan still did not answer. Seeing Xiao Yijuan dawdling, Feng Yu's temper flared up again, and her voice became louder. Xiao Yijuan instantly frowned. His handsome brows furrowed, and Feng Yu wailed in her heart. I just wanted to ask if you thought it through? Feng Yu swallowed silently and tried her best to suppress her temper. That depends on your performance. After Xiao Yijuan spoke, he calmly turned around and entered the house. Inside the house, Jing Yu was eating the desserts that Feng Yu had brought over. When she turned her head and saw Xiao Yijuan return, she immediately raised her eyebrows. When she turned her head again, she saw Feng Yu following behind Xiao Yijuan with a conflicted expression. She was surprised. This Xiao Yijuan was so powerful that he could subdue Feng Yu. Ninth Imperial Concubine. Xiao Yijuan nodded slightly at Jing Yu. Jing Yu raised her hand and gestured for Xiao Yijuan to sit down. Feng Yu did not wait for Jing Yu to greet her and sat down at the side. She stared at Xiao Yijuan with disdain, but there was nothing she could do. What did you say to her? You were gone for so long. Jing Yu raised her eyebrows and asked. Xiao Yijuan paused when he heard that. He turned his head and looked to the side. He saw that Feng Yu had become nervous and was blinking at Xiao Yijuan anxiously. It's just that Miss Feng Yu wants me to stay in this residence for a few more days. Xiao Yijuan lied without batting an eyelid. Jing Yu and Feng Yu were both stunned. Xiao Yijuan turned to Feng Yu and asked, Is that so, Miss Feng Yu? Yes, that's it. Feng Yu nodded with great difficulty. She didn't know why, but she felt as if she had jumped into a huge pit. I didn't expect your relationship to be so good. Jing Yu looked at the two of them with interest. She smiled and said, Speaking of which, Yijuan, you are now living in the bachelor's dormitory. Why don't you move back to the prince's mansion? The Ninth Imperial Concubine. Xiao Yijuan was slightly taken aback. Now, he was the one who felt embarrassed. I still have a lot of things to do in the academy, and it might not be appropriate for me to move back here. However, I hope that the Ninth Imperial Concubine won't dislike me when I visit the prince's residence more often in the future, Xiao Yijuan said as he bowed slightly towards Jing Yu. There was a faint smile in his eyes as he looked at Jing Yu. Of course not. Jing Yu smiled. She wasn't used to Yijuan being so polite after he had grown up. Jing Yu casually responded and said, If you like, you can come and play more often. You can also get to know Xiao Bai better. In the future, you will be able to take care of each other in the officialdom. Thank you, Ninth Imperial Concubine. Xiao Yijuan was full of joy as he thanked her. Phew! Feng Yu silently sighed in relief. It was good that she didn't move in. Otherwise, looking at the situation today, her future days would definitely be difficult. Also, Feng Yu, you went to the restaurant again today? Why did you bring me so many pastries? Jing Yu looked at Feng Yu with arched eyebrows. Chapter 1866. Jing Yu turned to look at Xiao Yijuan and said, You are very considerate. It's getting late. Yijuan, you should rest in the prince's mansion tonight. The room is still the room you used to live in. I've kept it for you. Thank you, Ninth Imperial Concubine. Xiao Yijuan nodded. Feng Yu, can you take Yijuan to rest? Jing Yu turned to Feng Yu and asked. Feng Yu opened her mouth to refuse, but when she saw Xiao Yijuan's gaze, her face instantly fell. She silently nodded in agreement. After leaving the courtyard, Feng Yu walked as fast as she could in an attempt to shake off Xiao Yijuan. However, after walking for half a day, she still couldn't shake off the person behind her. Instead, she was exhausted. Feng Yu sat at the side to rest and glared at Xiao Yijuan. This young master thought that you could fly. Why? Do you know how to be tired now? Xiao Yijuan leaned against a pillar and looked at Feng Yu. The corners of his mouth curled into a faint smile as he asked calmly, Don't you know the way? Why do you still need me to lead you? Feng Yu glared at Xiao Yijuan. It was the 9th imperial concubine who asked you to lead the way. What does that have to do with me? Xiao Yijuan tilted his head slightly and looked at the dark sky and the lit candles. He looked at the scenery in the mansion and was momentarily dazed. He didn't think that so much time had passed in the blink of an eye. However, the scenery in the mansion was still the same. It was really interesting. Hey, you still haven't told me. What's your relationship with the 9th imperial concubine? Feng Yu asked Xiao Yijuan curiously. Xiao Yijuan tilted his head slightly when he heard Feng Yu's words. He thought carefully for a while and seemed to be thinking about it too. Probably brother and sister. Xiao Yijuan thought back to the time when Jingyu forced him to call her sister. However, he couldn't remember if he had ever called her that. Huh. Feng Yu jumped up in surprise when she heard this. She went to Xiao Yijuan's side and said, "Then according to seniority, doesn't Xiao Bai have to call you uncle?" Xiao Yijuan frowned. "Ha ha, Xiao Bai has to call you uncle." Feng Yu seemed to have thought of something funny. Suddenly, he burst into laughter in the corridor. He didn't try to hide it. He laughed so happily that Xiao Yijuan was slightly dazed by his appearance. It was as if they had returned to the past. Jingyu was also this unrestrained. She did not care about how others looked at her. No matter where she was, she would smile like this when she was happy. This smile seemed to be contagious, and it made Xiao Yijuan's eyes darken. What a crazy woman. Xiao Yijuan called her a familiar name. Back then, when he faced Jingyu, he also called her an ugly woman and a crazy woman. What did you say? You're the crazy one. Feng Yu was immediately enraged. She bared her fangs and brandished her claws, wanting to pounce on Xiao Yijuan. However, when she approached Xiao Yijuan immediately grabbed her wrist. What are you doing? Are you going to molest me again? Feng Yu made a fuss about nothing. However, after she finished speaking, she saw Xiao Yijuan's hand staring at her. She immediately tried to withdraw her hand unnaturally, but Xiao Yijuan suddenly tightened his grip. You're injured. Don't you know how to bandage yourself? There was a faint anger in Xiao Yijuan's eyes. Feng Yu opened her mouth to speak, but stopped when she saw Xiao Yuling's expression. Chapter 1867. I just forgot all of a sudden. Feng Yu said quietly. It's not easy for you to live well in the pugilistic world until now, Xiao Yijuan said calmly. Feng Yu's eyes widened when she heard Xiao Yijuan's words. She was about to retort when Xiao Yijuan grabbed her hand and led her forward. Hey, where are you taking me? Hey, Xiao Yijuan. Feng Yu yelled from behind, but Xiao Yijuan didn't care at all. The room was brightly lit by candles. Xiao Yijuan turned to look at Feng Yu, who was looking around, and said calmly, You've never seen a man's bedroom? Who said so? Of course I've seen it. When Feng Yu heard Xiao Yijuan's words, she immediately jumped up as if someone had stepped on her tail. Her eyes were filled with embarrassment as she stared at Xiao Yijuan and said, Looking at you, I know you often bring women in. Give me your hand. Xiao Yijuan raised his eyebrows calmly and did not refute. Feng Yu mumbled something in her heart. Her heart trembled slightly when she saw Xiao Yijuan applying medicine for her. Hey, you really look like my brother Ling, Feng Yu said as she blinked at Xiao Yijuan. Huh? Xiao Yijuan's face turned cold, and he said rudely, If I had a sister like you, my life would probably be shortened. Bastard. Someone like you. Someone with a short life. Feng Yu said angrily as she glared at Xiao Yijuan. Xiao Yijuan reached out to tie a knot and applied a little force. Feng Yu immediately cried out, Do you know how to bandage? Be careful. Xiao Yijuan looked up at Feng Yu and said, I thought you weren't afraid of pain. After all, you can endure not bandaging for so long, right? Just as Feng Yu was about to retort, she heard the sound of an announcement coming from outside. Young Master, Master Shitzi is here, the servant said carefully. Please come in. Xiao Yijuan nodded slightly and said calmly as he stood up. Xiao Bai walked in with brisk steps. His expression did not change at all, but when he saw Feng Yu sitting in the room, a trace of surprise appeared in his eyes. Then, his face gradually turned cold. Why are you here? Xiao Bai found it strange. He didn't look at Xiao Yijuan the moment he came in. Instead, he looked at Xiao Yijuan. No reason. If you can come, Why can't I? Feng Yu smiled nonchalantly. She turned to Xiao Yijuan and said, Thank you for today. Seeing that you have a guest, I won't disturb you any longer. I'll leave first. As Feng Yu spoke, she stood up and waved slightly at Xiao Yijuan. She was about to walk out when Xiao Bai saw Feng Yu's bandaged hand when she waved her hand. What happened to your hand? Xiao Bai frowned and asked. What does it have to do with you? Feng Yu replied coldly and turned to leave. Just as Xiao Bai was about to call out to Feng Yu, he heard Xiao Yijuan's voice. Master Shitzi, why are you looking for me? Xiao Bai paused and turned to look at Xiao Yijuan. He frowned slightly and said, I heard from Mother that you're in the mansion. I have something to ask you. Master Shitzi, please sit. Xiao Yijuan nodded slightly. Chapter 1868. The weather was getting colder, and the night wasn't necessarily peaceful. Xiao Chen had been out for an entire day and only returned late at night, bringing with him a cool breeze. Without Xiao Chen by her side, Jingyu couldn't sleep peacefully. At this moment, she was already yawning and reading a book. When she heard the voice of the servant girl outside, she immediately put down the book in her hand, and a hint of surprise appeared in her eyes. Xiao Chen, you're back. Jingyu stood up and looked at Xiao Chen, who was striding into the room and taking off his cloak. Why are you still awake at this time? Xiao Chen saw that Jingyu was still awake and frowned slightly, his eyes filled with dissatisfaction. How is it? Jingyu looked at Xiao Chen nervously and asked. I'll go wash up and tell you slowly. Xiao Chen raised his hand and touched Jingyu's cheek. He gently smiled and said, It's cold at night. Go inside and rest. Jingyu nodded and agreed. Xiao Chen then went to wash up. Jingyu waited for a while before she saw Xiao Chen return. He was wearing a simple inner garment and a coat. After entering the room, he took off his coat. When Jingyu turned her head, she saw the faint tiredness in Xiao Chen's eyes, and her heart ached. You've worked hard. Jingyu saw that Xiao Chen was lying down and then gently went forward to massage Xiao Chen's shoulders. You are so virtuous. Your husband is really overwhelmed by your favor. Xiao Chen followed Jingyu's massage. It was obvious that he hadn't served anyone before and was just randomly massaging. Xiao Chen paused and reached out to take Jingyu's hand away. Today, I took third Xing to the place where Madame Nia was buried. Xiao Chen didn't hide anything and looked deeply at Jingyu and said, The body is still there. It's still there. Jingyu's eyes instantly widened. Her body went limp, and she looked at Xiao Chen with some fear. But I discovered that the body wasn't Madame Nia's. Xiao Chen frowned deeply at Jingyu and said, It's obvious that this is a female body that was replaced. What? How could this be? Jingyu looked at Xiao Chen in shock. Xiao Chen's expression was also very serious. He frowned deeply and said, I don't know what's going on either. I had people search for footprints in the surrounding area. In the process of searching, I saw that the footprints indeed led to the Taoist temple on the mountain outside the city, Xiao Chen said again. There must be some connection. There's really nothing in this Taoist temple. A very strange thought rose in Jingyu's mind. She seemed to have thought of something and turned to ask Xiao Chen, Have you searched outside this Taoist temple? There might be some secret passageways around the Taoist temple. Jingyu thought back to when she was out on a mission in the past and encountered a similar situation. She looked deeply at Xiao Chen and said, We can't let go of these details. Now that you mention it, you reminded me. Xiao Chen nodded slowly and said, I've been staring at the inside of the Taoist temple and neglected the outside. I'll check it out again tomorrow. Based on what you said, Madame Nia might have been rescued by someone and is still alive, Jingyu said with a deep frown. The person I saw was definitely Madame Nia. It can't be wrong. Chapter 1869. Jingyu said with incomparable determination. Xiao Chen also frowned seriously. Madame Nia is back? What's her motive? Jingyu felt more and more uneasy. Don't worry, I won't give her a chance to do anything. Xiao Chen looked at Jingyu's worried expression and reached out to hug Jingyu. This time, I won't give her a chance to do anything. Don't worry. And Jingyu slowly lowered her eyes. Although she agreed, her furrowed brows didn't relax. You don't have to worry about these things. Giving birth to the child is the most important thing, Xiao Chan said as he reached out to stroke Jing Yu's stomach. Today, I also received news from Miracle Physician Valley that little potato is back. Really? This was probably the best news Jing Yu had heard in a while. When Jing Yu heard Xiao Chen's words, her eyes were filled with joy. She abruptly straightened her body and looked at Xiao Chan in surprise. You're saying that little potato is coming back? Yes, little potato is coming back, Xiao Chen replied as he nodded slowly. That's great. Little potato is really fine. He's coming back. Jing Yu's eyes instantly became misty. Her worry and longing for little potato had always been suppressed in her heart. Now that she finally heard this news, she instantly felt hot tears brimming in her eyes. I already said that little potato is our child. How could anything happen to him? Xiao Chun hugged Jing Yu with heartache. His calm words seemed to carry some sort of reassurance. Jing Yu nodded repeatedly in Xiao Chen's arms. This night seemed to be much more peaceful. Jing Yu didn't know how she fell asleep in Xiao Chen's arms. She only knew that when she woke up, she was still hugging Xiao Chen's body. Xiao Chen was still sleeping soundly. It seemed like he was exhausted from the past few days. Jing Yu's eyes were filled with heartache. She hugged Xiao Chen tighter and closed her eyes again. Xiao Chen seemed to feel something as he turned around slightly and hugged Jing Yu in his arms. When the two of them woke up again, they didn't know how much time had passed. Your arm is numb? Jing Yu looked at Xiao Chan rubbing his arm and knew that she must have fallen asleep. She suddenly felt a little embarrassed. It's just that I slept for a long time. Can your little weight crush me? Xiao Chen raised his eyebrows slightly and said to Jing Yu. Jing Yu smiled when she heard Xiao Chen's words. She sat at the table at the side and ate her breakfast. Xiao Chen also ate his breakfast before leaving. Jing Yu watched Xiao Chen leave. She raised her hand and caressed her stomach in a daze. She was a little worried. She wanted to help now, but there was nothing she could do. The most important thing right now was to give birth to the child in her stomach. When Xiao Chan brought third Xing out of the residence, he bumped into Xiao Yijuan on the stone path. He didn't expect Xiao Chen to be here, but his expression didn't change. Xiao Yijuan, on the other hand, had a look of surprise in his eyes. Ninth Emperors. Xiao Yijuan bowed slightly to Xiao Chen. How did you have time to come to the residence? Did you go to see the imperial concubine? Xiao Chen nodded slightly and asked Xiao Yijuan. I saw her yesterday. The Ninth Emperors didn't come back, so I didn't see her. Xiao Yijuan seemed a little reserved as he said. Xiao Chen nodded slightly. Chapter 1870. Yes, you can chat with the imperial concubine when you have time. Xiao Bai has a lot of things he doesn't understand about the court, so you two can talk about it. Xiao Chen nodded slightly, then turned around and said, There are still some small matters that need to be taken care of. Yes, farewell, Ninth Emperors. Xiao Yijuan immediately retreated to the side and cupped his hands as he looked at Xiao Chen's departing figure. That ink-black robe was just like the one in his memory. Even after so long, Xiao Yijuan still clearly remembered the moment Xiao Chan stood beside him and asked him in a very calm voice, Will you leave with me? That black-robed man, the Ninth Emperors that he respected, would not change because of time. He was so silent, but it was like the dawn of his life. Hey, you've been standing here for so long. The Ninth Emperors have left long ago. As Xiao Yijuan stood in place, he suddenly heard a familiar voice. He was stunned for a moment, and when he turned his head, he saw Feng Yu's curious little face. Although the Ninth Emperor's is incomparably handsome, you're a man. Why are you looking so closely? Feng Yu seemed to be very puzzled as she asked. What nonsense are you talking about? Xiao Yijuan reached out and knocked Feng Yu's head. He glared at Feng Yu and said, I'm leaving. Where are you going? Feng Yu was slightly stunned. She touched her head and blocked Xiao Yijuan. She said very confusedly, Could it be that you were provoked by my words just now? Are you angry? You're a man. How can you be so petty? Feng Yu exclaimed. There's something going on in the academy. I need to go out, Xiao Yijuan said helplessly. Feng Yu heard this and nodded absent-mindedly. So it was like that. After seeing Xiao Yijuan leave, she heaved a sigh of relief. She thought that Xiao Yijuan was angered by her. If those words were to reach Feng Ling's ears, she would definitely lose a layer of skin. Thinking of this, Feng Yu curled her lips and went to play. Feng Yu thought that she hadn't seen Feng Maching for some time, so she turned and went to Feng Maching's room. When she stepped into the room, she saw Feng Maching staring outside in a daze. He didn't say a word, and he didn't react at all even when Feng Yu came. Feng Maching? Aunt Feng? Uncle Feng? Feng Yu silently called out a few times, but Feng Maching didn't respond to her. Why did such a fine person suddenly turn silly? Feng Yu looked at Feng Maching and sat at the side, staring at Feng Maching as she said in a conflicted manner, "Ah, big sister Feng Yu." Just as Feng Yu was staring at Feng Maching, he suddenly heard a familiar form of address and was slightly stunned. When he turned his head to look, he saw Yun Yun quickly walking into the house with a bowl of rice in her hands. "Yuns, why are you here?" Feng Yu looked at Yun Yun, and her expression was very interesting. "I'm here to deliver food." Yun Yun smiled sweetly and said, "I've been in the prince's mansion for so long. It's better to find something to do before." Yun Yun's words were so serious that it made Feng Yu feel uncomfortable. Feng Yu had arrived earlier than Yun Yun, but she had been here for so long. It was already good enough that she didn't cause any trouble. How could she take the initiative to do something? Cough, cough. "You're really sensible." Feng Yu smiled silently. Looking at Yun Yun's familiar appearance, she felt even more embarrassed. She casually found an excuse to sit on the stone table outside the courtyard. Chapter 1871. When Yun Yun poked her head out, she happened to see Feng Yu sitting to the side and immediately came over curiously. "What's wrong?" Feng Yu asked Yun Yun with a slight frown. "Big sister Feng Yu, I heard that you and Big Brother Xiaobai grew up together. Then do you know what Big Brother Xiaobai likes to eat the most?" Yun Yun looked at Feng Yu expectantly and said, "I want to personally make something delicious for Big Brother Xiaobai." Feng Yu's breath paused, and she said with an unnatural expression, "How would I know what Xiaobai likes to eat? I see that you're so close to Xiaobai. Why don't you just ask him directly?" Feng Yu said calmly, I want to give Big Brother Xiaobai a surprise." Yun Yun said with a slightly red face, "My mother said that Big Brother Xiaobai treats me very well. I want to remember it and repay Big Brother Xiaobai. So, I want to make something delicious for Big Brother Xiaobai." "You really put in a lot of effort," Feng Yu said quietly. "Big sister Feng Yu, think about it carefully. What does Big Brother Xiaobai like to eat?" Yin Yin looked at Feng Yu expectantly. Feng Yu opened her mouth to say that she didn't know, but she suddenly remembered that Xiaobai once told her that the day he was found by Jingyu, he ate the roasted pheasant personally roasted by Jingyu. It was the most delicious thing he had ever eaten in his life. He said that he would remember it for the rest of his life. It was probably something he liked. Feng Yu looked down at Yin Yun and said, "He should like to eat roasted pheasant." Yin Yun's face fell, and she frowned in confusion. Yun Yun was the daughter of the poison sect's eldest young master and had been doted on since she was young. How could she know how to catch a pheasant? She definitely didn't know how to roast pheasant. This pheasant. Where do I go to catch it? Yin Yun's eyes were filled with disappointment. It's not easy to make something like this, so you shouldn't make it, Feng Yu said as she stood up calmly. Yun Yun anxiously grabbed Feng Yu's hand and said, "Big sister Feng Yu, you definitely know how to make it, right? Can you teach me?" Yun Yun looked at Feng Yu with grievance and said, "If I really want to make it, can you teach me?" "Me neither." Feng Yu refused without even thinking about it. However, Yun Yun tugged at Feng Yu's sleeve and refused to let go. Her eyes immediately turned red. Seeing that Yun Yun was about to cry, Feng Yu immediately waved her hand. "Why are you crying? Don't cry. I'll help. I'll help you, okay?" Feng Yu frowned with a headache. How could this little girl cry so easily? "Really? Big sis Feng Yu, you're really willing to help me. That's great." Yin Yin was about to cry a second ago, but in the next second, she returned to normal. This change in expression really made Feng Yu's eyes twitch fiercely. However, he didn't know whether to laugh or cry in his heart. Since he had already agreed, there was no reason for him to go back on his word. Yin Yin happily went to retrieve the lunchbox in the house. Feng Yu glanced at it. Feng Maching didn't eat much at all. How could he recover if this went on? "Wait here for a moment." As Feng Yu spoke, she reached out and took the food box. She rushed into the house and closed the door with a bang. She reached out and placed the food box in front of Feng Maching. She said with a cold face, "Feng Maching, do you want to die? You've been here all day without eating or drinking." Feng Yu glared at Feng Maching and said, Chapter 1872. If you don't want to live anymore, just say it. There's no need to pretend to be half dead here. Feng Yu narrowed her eyes and said, "If you die, everything will be over. No one will be able to see you, and then the people you care about will slowly forget you. From then on, there will be no Feng Maching in this world. Why don't you kill yourself? What's the point of keeping you in this state?" Feng Yu's words could be said to be merciless. She glared at Feng Maching and said, "Anyway, you don't want to fight for what you want, so there's nothing to be reluctant to leave, right?" When Feng Yu said this, she suddenly saw Feng Maching's eyes change slightly. He turned his head slightly to look at Feng Yu. "I don't know why you become like this." Feng Yu saw that Feng Maching finally moved. She lowered her head slightly and said, "I only know that Feng Maching, you've never been like this before. It makes me feel like I'm looking down on you. Do you still remember what you told me?" Feng Yu pursed her lips slightly and looked at Feng Maching. She said, "You told me that in this world, nothing is more important than living. Now, I'll return these words to you." After Feng Yu finished speaking, she threw the food box heavily, turned around coldly, and left. Yin Yun, who was outside the room, didn't know what Feng Yu had done. All she thought about was making delicious food. Feng Maching's eyes fell on the food box. Feng Maching heard Feng Yu's words just now. If he died, Helly and Theo would forget about him. Forget about him just like that. No, no. Feng Maching frowned fiercely. There was a thick coldness in his eyes. He reached out to take the food as if he had made up his mind. Then he swallowed it in big mouthfuls. How could he die so willingly? He wasn't willing. The food in his mouth seemed to have lost its taste. It was as if there was no taste at all. Feng Yu didn't know whether Feng Maching had eaten or not, but Yin Yun pulled Feng Yu outside. In the imperial city, wild pheasants naturally didn't need to be caught by themselves. How could the prince's residents not be able to find a pheasant if they wanted one? The kitchen quickly got a live pheasant. Feng Yu and Yin Yun directly took over the kitchen. When the steward of the kitchen heard that the two of them wanted to cook, he was very worried. He then reported this matter to Jingyu. When Jingyu first heard about it, she was surprised. What were these two girls trying to do? There's no need to stop him. After some thought, Jingyu nodded and said, "Just watch from the side. As long as they don't burn down our residence, it won't be a big deal." Yes. The kitchen steward silently wiped away his cold sweat. Only a master like Jing Yu would be so careless. On the other side, Feng Yu and Yin Yun were busy in the kitchen and courtyard. To be precise, Feng Yu was watching from the side with her arms crossed. Yin Yun had accidentally let the pheasant run away and was now chasing it all over the courtyard. "You?" Feng Yu furrowed her brows. Was this girl really Yun Tian's daughter? Was she really from the poison sect? Aya! The pheasant suddenly jumped up, startling Yin Yun so much that she retreated and sat on the ground. Tears immediately appeared in her eyes. She stubbornly stared at the pheasant and forced her tears back. Then, she continued to pounce on the pheasant. Chapter 1873. Aya! Another scream. Yin Yun looked at the back of her hand that was scratched and looked at Feng Yu with a face full of grievance. Sigh. Feng Yu sighed helplessly and said deeply, "With your appearance, you still want a roast chicken?" Yin Yun's face was full of grievance, but she stubbornly glared and didn't say anything. "Let me do it," Feng Yu said as she walked down. She stared at the pheasant and her eyes narrowed. Suddenly, she pounced over and grabbed the pheasant by its wings. She raised her hand and pulled out a dagger. Then, she mercilessly cut open the pheasant's neck and dried the blood. Yin Yun looked at Feng Yu's actions, and her heart couldn't bear it. Then, she saw Feng Yu throw the pheasant into the boiling water. She swallowed her saliva and turned her head to look at Feng Yu with a different gaze. "Why are you looking at me like that?" Feng Yu frowned slightly. She looked at Yin Yun and said, "In any case, you are Yun Tian's daughter. Don't tell me you haven't even killed a pheasant before. My, my father doesn't allow me to do it. Yin Yin lowered her head and laughed. Oh. Feng Yu nodded silently and said, Go and pluck the pheasant's feathers clean. Okay. Yin Yin excitedly went to do it. So hot, so hot. Do I pluck it like this? No. Pluck it like this. Forget it. Go and start a fire. It's burning, it's burning. The kitchen was in chaos. Feng Yu was almost half dead from Yin Yun's torment. Feng Yu also deeply felt that the sky was about to turn dark. If she continued to torment like this, she was afraid that she wouldn't be able to eat this pheasant. In the end, she silently pulled Yin Yin behind her and personally did it. Yin Yin watched from the side. If she wanted to do it in the future, she could do it according to this method. Yin Yin repeatedly nodded and agreed to Feng Yu's words. Feng Yu taught very seriously and carefully explained the steps to Yin Yin. When the sky gradually darkened, Feng Yu used a lotus leaf to wrap the pheasant and let out a big sigh of relief. It's done. Feng Yu smiled and said to Yin Yin, It smells so good. Yin Yun's eyes were shining. She looked at Feng Yu in surprise and said, Big sister Feng Yu, you're really amazing. It's nothing. The 9th Imperial Concubine is even better. I learned this from her. Feng Yu blinked nonchalantly and said, Hurry up and give this to Xiao Bai. But Yin Yin heard Feng Yu's words and said, But this was done by you. I want to cook for him myself. It's fine, Feng Yu said as she washed her hands. You can learn more in the future. Just treat this as me treating the two of you to a meal. I'm giving you a chance to perform. Go, Feng Yu said as she winked at Yin Yin. Big sister Feng Yu, you're the best, Yin Yin exclaimed in surprise. She quickly picked up the roast chicken and ran out, saying, Thank you, sister Yu. Feng Yu looked at the lively Yun Yun who ran away, and a faint smile appeared in her eyes. She looked at the dirty bandage on her hand and frowned. Originally, she wanted to change it, but she realized that she was hungry. She decisively chose to eat first. She had been tormented for a day. Feng Yu returned to the house and called for food. Just as she was about to eat, she saw Feng Ling walking towards her. Chapter 1874. Brother Ling, why are you here? Feng Yu was stunned when she saw Feng Ling. Feng Ling had been following Xiaochen around for the past few days. Her sudden appearance shocked Feng Yu. I'm here to see you. Feng Ling smiled when she saw Feng Yu. She sat down beside Feng Yu and said, I'm hungry too. I'll eat here. Brother Ling, you're not here to freeload, are you? Feng Yu stared at Feng Ling strangely. I guess so. Feng Ling faintly arched her brows and watched as the servant girl brought in a bowl and chopsticks. She then calmly ate at the side. Feng Yu looked at Feng Ling's behavior. When she turned her head, she saw that her favorite dishes were about to be eaten up. She immediately made a big fuss. Leave some for me, Feng Yu said and began to eat in large chunks. Feng Ling giggled and ate for a long time. She was full, but she still stayed in Feng Yu's room and didn't leave. She leaned against a chair and leisurely read a book. From time to time, she would say, The books in the prince's mansion are really good. Feng Yu sat on the other side. When she saw Feng Ling like this, she lowered her eyes. Xiao Yu, look. This story is really interesting, Feng Ling said with a smile. Brother Ling. Feng Yu lowered her head slightly and looked at Feng Ling deeply. She asked, What do you want to say? Say it. The smile on Feng Ling's face instantly froze. She tilted her head and looked at Feng Yu. When she saw Feng Yu's lowered head, her breathing became sluggish and she slowly put down the book in her hand. Xiao Yu, Feng Ling called out softly. Feng Yu smiled faintly. Since young, Feng Ling would always be like this whenever something happened. She was very familiar with it. Now, she must have something important to tell her. Xiao Yu, have you ever thought of going back? Feng Ling was silent for a moment. She furrowed her brows tightly and looked at Feng Yu silently. There was a hint of probing in her tone as she quietly looked at Feng Yu and asked, Go back. Feng Yu abruptly raised her head. Her pupils dilated slightly, and the expression in her eyes became a little bit more fearful. Brother Ling, you don't want me anymore? You want to chase me away? Feng Yu's hand tightened little by little, and her pitch-black eyes were filled with panic. That's not what I meant. Feng Ling hurriedly sat beside Feng Yu and said, during this period of time, when I was following the 9 emperors to investigate the people from Yaojiang, I accidentally discovered people from Nanjiang. If I'm not wrong, they're father's people. Feng Yu's expression turned cold bit by bit. She pursed her lips tightly and looked like she didn't want to speak. Little Yu. Feng Ling lowered her head slightly and said, forget it. No matter what, I will protect you. Rest early. Just pretend I didn't say anything. When Feng Ling saw that Feng Yu was ignoring her, she sighed deeply. There were some things that she didn't say. Feng Yu's eyes darkened slightly. She lowered her head slightly as she watched Feng Ling's departing figure. What happened here didn't affect anyone, and no one knew. However, on the other side, another scene was happening. Is it delicious? Yin Yin carefully looked at Xiao Bai and asked. Her small face was filled with nervousness. Chapter 1875. Xiao Bai swallowed the chicken in his mouth. Looking at the roast chicken in front of him, he fell silent. I heard that you like to eat roast chicken, so I wanted to make it for you, but Yin Yin was a little anxious when she saw Xiao Bai's silence. She thought that Xiao Bai didn't like it, so she quickly said, It's delicious, thank you. Xiao Bai took a deep breath and turned to look at Yin Yin. His pitch-black eyes were filled with specks of light, and he was looking at Yin Yin more seriously than he had ever looked at her before. You're welcome. Yin Yin blushed when Xiao Bai stared at her. The atmosphere in the room had never been so good. Yin Yin wanted to say that the roast chicken was made by Feng Yu several times, but when she saw Xiao Bai eating happily, she didn't have the heart to say anything. She thought to herself, I'll tell Xiao Bai tomorrow. I'll let him eat now. The 2 figures sitting in the room were eating together. The way they talked and laughed was so warm. On the other side, Feng Yu washed up and sat on the windowsill. Her dark eyes stared out of the window, and she was slightly stunned by the dark night. Miaojiang. It was the place she didn't want to go back to in her life. She was only 4 years old at that time. If she wasn't taken away by Feng Ling, she would have become a goo person. Those disgusting bugs should have been something she hated her whole life, but they seemed to have taken root in her body. Those people and those things were something she could never forget in her life. But she wanted to forget with all her might. It was drizzling during the day. Feng Yu was walking on the streets of the prince's mansion. She was probably affected by what happened last night. Feng Yu didn't seem as lively as before. She walked silently on the streets. As she walked, she suddenly stopped. The south of Miaojiang was called the southern border. Did the people from the southern border come to the imperial city? If they found Feng Ling, it would be a big problem. As Feng Yu thought of this, she suddenly frowned. After pondering for a moment, she walked towards Xing Yi's room. In the courtyard, Su Yu was practicing her swordsmanship. Feng Yu stood to the side and watched Su Yu's fierce swordsmanship. Her eyes lit up slightly. Good. Feng Yu immediately applauded at the end of the speech. Why are you here? Are you here to steal my techniques? Su Yu slowly put away the long sword in her hand and calmly asked Feng Yu. The swordsmanship of your Constellation Palace is too exaggerated. The swordsmanship of my Darkeen sect is much sharper. Feng Yu proudly raised her eyebrows. As she spoke, she walked towards Su Yu and faintly said, I have something to ask you. Speak. Su Yu faintly raised her eyebrows. Feng Yu also walked over and casually sat down. She looked around and said, Brother Xing Yi isn't here. He went out to do something. Su Yu pursed her lips slightly, looked at Feng Yu and asked, Why? What's the matter? I have something to ask him. Feng Yu nodded. She looked at Su Yu and asked, Do you know anything about the Miaojiang people? Not much. Su Yu nodded calmly. She slightly tilted her head to look at Feng Yu and asked, Why do you ask about the Miaojiang people? Although I also heard that you are from Miaojiang, what's the connection? Nothing. Feng Yu lowered her head and didn't say anything. Chapter 1876. Xing, you will come back at night. If you have any questions, you can come back at night. Su Yu stood up and said, Or I'll ask Xing Yi to find you when he comes back. Thank you. Feng Yu thanked her lightly and then left absent-mindedly. Just as she walked out of the courtyard, she saw Ling Yong walking towards her. She was slightly taken aback and quickly walked up to him. Ling Yong also saw Feng Yu. He stopped in his tracks and nodded slightly to Feng Yu. Miss Feng Yu. Ling Yong, did you come back from outside? Feng Yu looked at Ling Yong and asked anxiously, what's the situation outside now? How are the people in Miaojiang? The situation is not very good. Ling Yong heard Feng Yu's question and lowered his eyes slightly. He said, these days we found two groups of people from Miaojiang. These two groups seem to have different purposes. At present, we haven't confirmed what is going on, but we know that one of them is looking for someone. It seems that they are looking for the daughter of the patriarch. You'd better ask Sect Master Feng Ling about the details. He seems to be a little worried about this matter. Ling Yong pursed his lips tightly and looked at Feng Yu. Do you know what's going on with this group of people from Miaojiang? Feng Yu frowned and asked, I'm not sure, but a few days ago, the Dark Yin sect was attacked. There were not many casualties. Ling Yong was silent for a while. Then he looked sideways at Feng Yu and asked, don't you know about this? Didn't Sect Master Feng Ling tell you that the Dark Yin sect was attacked? The Dark Yin sect was attacked. Feng Yu's eyes suddenly widened. Her dark eyes were full of astonishment. She stared at Ling Yong and asked, who attacked them? Is it the people from Miaojiang? Yes. Ling Yong nodded slowly and said, but this matter was suppressed by Sect Master Feng Ling. It seems that it didn't cause any casualties, so it was suppressed. Feng Yu's eyes were full of astonishment. Then the expression on her face gradually became cold. Maybe Sect Master Feng Ling doesn't want you to worry. Ling Yong looked at Feng Yu's face and was silent for a while. Thank you for telling me. Feng Yu took a deep breath and bowed slightly to Ling Yong. Then she turned around and left. Ling Yong looked at Feng Yu's back and frowned. Why does she look so strange? Why didn't Feng Yu know anything about the Dark Yin sect? This Feng Ling really had a good grasp of information. Ling Yong shook his head slightly, turned around, and walked towards the courtyard. He still had something to tell Su Yu. Feng Yu walked to a nearby pavilion and sat down. Her mind was in a mess. She was thinking about what Ling Yong had said. Feng Ling didn't tell her that the Dark Yin sect had been attacked. She didn't want her to worry. The Dark Yin sect was attacked by the people of the south border. The people of the south border really came here. They didn't target the Dark Yin sect right away. Obviously, they knew that he was here. This was probably what Feng Ling wanted to tell him yesterday. If Feng Yu was still hiding here, the people of Nanjiang would sooner or later make a move on the prince's mansion. So many years had passed, but the people of Nanjiang were still so barbaric and unreasonable. She thought of the ferocious man who claimed to be her father. Feng Yu couldn't guarantee whether their next target would be Feng Ling or not. If Feng Ling was hurt because of her and the Dark Yin sect was destroyed, Feng Yu would never forgive herself. Chapter 1877. Little girl, what are you so engrossed in your thoughts? Just as Feng Yu was lost in her thoughts, a faint voice sounded behind her. Her nose was filled with a fragrant scent. Feng Yu was so startled that she almost jumped up. She quickly leaned back and turned to look at the person who had suddenly appeared behind her. Xiao Yijuan, you don't even make a sound when you walk. You scare me to death. Feng Yu patted her chest as she glared fiercely at Xiao Yijuan in disdain. Xiao Yijuan's face darkened. He went straight to the prince's mansion to see this little girl after he was done with his work. Who knew that he would be scolded the moment he arrived? Besides, he didn't make a sound when he walked. He was obviously very loud, but Feng Yu didn't hear him. Did you eat garlic? Why are you so angry? Xiao Yijuan frowned in dissatisfaction. Really? Feng Yu glared at Xiao Yijuan and sat silently at the side again. Xiao Yijuan was curious when he saw Feng Yu's lack of interest. What happened? Why did Feng Yu end up like this? Something on your mind? Xiao Yijuan sat down and asked Feng Yu with narrowed eyes. No. Feng Yu turned her head away and didn't want to speak. Xiao Yijuan was silent for a while. When he looked down, he saw Feng Yu's bandaged wound again and frowned. He reached out to grab Feng Yu's hand and said with a frown, the cloth is already so dirty. Why aren't you changing it? Are you waiting for the wound to get infected? Xiao Yijuan's words were full of dissatisfaction. Feng Yu was stunned when she heard Xiao Yijuan's words. She frowned slightly and seemed to want to take her hand back. I forgot. Feng Yu pursed her lips and said, It's just a scratch. It won't get infected. Xiao Yijuan looked deeply at Feng Yu and said, "Do you have to wait until you're about to die before you feel that it's serious?" Feng Yu looked at Xiao Yijuan's angry eyes and immediately shut up. Although she didn't know why Xiao Yijuan was angry, it was obviously not the time for her to speak. Feng Yu kept quiet, looking at Xiao Yijuan silently helping her change her dressing. Although his face was still dark, Feng Yu's heart softened a little. "Why are you being so nice to me?" Feng Yu asked Xiao Yijuan curiously. When Feng Yu finished speaking, Xiao Yijuan's hand froze. He was silent for a moment, then lowered his head and said, "It's probably because no one cares about you, this little pitiful thing." "Who are you calling pitiful?" When Feng Yu heard Xiao Yijuan's words, she was instantly enraged. She glared at Xiao Yijuan angrily. Why did she feel that this person treated her well? How could this be? She was simply looking for an opportunity to insult him all the time. It was too unbearable. "Oh, I'm wrong." Xiao Yijuan smiled and said, "She's a little pitiful worm that no one dotes on." "Oh." Feng Yu pounced on Xiao Yijuan with bared fangs and brandished claws. "I'm going to rip your mouth off." "Feng Yu." Just as the two of them were making a ruckus, a cold shout rang out. Feng Yu paused and turned her head with a puzzled expression. She saw Xiao Bai in the distance, rushing toward the pavilion with a furious expression. Feng Yu was slightly stunned. She looked at Xiao Bai and opened her mouth to ask, but was stopped by Xiao Bai's words. Chapter 1878. If you want to embarrass yourself, do it in your own room. Don't taint the atmosphere of the prince's mansion. Xiao Bai's face was full of anger as he stared coldly at Feng Yu with his pitch-black eyes. Feng Yu's eyes widened in disbelief when she heard Xiao Bai's words. She straightened her body slightly as a faint blush appeared on her face. She looked at Xiao Bai as if she had heard the funniest thing in the world and asked, "What did you just say?" "Me? Taint the atmosphere of the prince's mansion." Feng Yu raised her finger and pointed at the tip of her nose. Then, as if she had heard the funniest thing in the world, she suddenly laughed out loud. "Ha ha, that's too funny. Lord Heir, may I ask what kind of immoral thing I have done to taint the atmosphere of the prince's mansion?" Feng Yu was so angry that she laughed instead. She finally looked at Xiao Bai with disappointment and no longer had any of the light in her eyes. "Lord Heir." Xiao Yijuan stood up slowly from the side and shielded Feng Yu behind him. "We didn't do anything that crossed the line. I was only helping Miss Feng Yu dress her wound. This concerns Miss Feng Yu's reputation, so I ask Lord Heir to be careful with your words. Don't say any more." Feng Yu turned her head with disdain. In his eyes, "I'm a wild girl through and through. Look at it now. I'm still an immoral woman. Do you think I want to stay in your prince's mansion?" Feng Yu's eyes were filled with coldness. She reached out and flung out the long whip around her waist. It hung on the eaves of the pavilion, and her petite body suddenly flung out. She stepped lightly on the stones in the pond and suddenly jumped up and landed on the ground. Then, she left without looking back. Xiao Bai watched Feng Yu's series of actions and listened to her words. He clenched his fists tightly by his side. He didn't know why, but when he saw the scene just now, he just blurted out those words. "Xiao Bai, you've gone too far." Xiao Yijuan's expression was very cold. This time, he didn't address Xiao Bai respectfully, but directly called him by his name. Then, he walked past Xiao Bai and left Xiao Bai standing there alone. "Lord Heir?" Beside him, Interrogation Officer 11 frowned slightly and called out, "Let's go." Xiao Bai furrowed his brows tightly and left with a cold face. From Xiao Bai's point of view, Feng Yu was just throwing a tantrum. Feng Yu was often like this before, but wasn't she fine in the end? Xiao Bai didn't take it to heart, but Xiao Yijuan did. At the door, Xiao Yijuan looked at the tightly shut door and frowned deeply. He stood silently in front of the door for a long time. In the end, he turned and left without saying a word. Feng Yu sat on the soft couch and stared blankly at the empty teacup. "Feng Yu." Someone knocked on the door. It was Feng Ling's voice. "Brother Ling, why are you back so early?" Feng Yu lowered her head and opened the door. Only then did she raise her head to look at Feng Ling. Just as she was about to speak, she suddenly paused. She frowned and sniffed Feng Ling's body. "Brother Ling, Why are you using incense for no reason? Feng Yu immediately frowned and stepped aside to let Feng Ling in. It smelled pretty good, so I tried it. Feng Ling's answer was very natural, but Feng Yu frowned. When Feng Maching used incense in the past, he was despised by her brother. Chapter 1879. She was actually using it herself. This was obviously abnormal. Brother Ling, are you hiding something from me? Feng Yu looked at Feng Ling suspiciously. Feng Ling casually poured himself a cup of tea, took a sip, and said, I heard that Xiao Bai bullied you today? Feng Ling didn't answer Feng Yu's question. Instead, he changed the topic. Huh, he bullied me. What a joke. Feng Yu was slightly stunned. Then, she said arrogantly, sooner or later, I'll get back at him. Just like in the past, Feng Yu used to say this sentence the most. Today was the same. Feng Yu said the same sentence once again. The words were the same, the tone was the same, but the feeling in her heart was different. You, when will you learn your lesson? Feng Ling listened to Feng Yu's words and didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He reached out and rubbed Feng Yu's head. What's wrong with me? I'm fine. Feng Yu slapped Feng Ling's hand and said, I'm not a child anymore. Brother Ling, don't keep rubbing my head. Okay. Feng Ling stood up and said, Big child, you should rest. I know. Hurry up and leave. Feng Yu said and pushed Feng Ling out with a look of disdain. Feng Ling, who was standing by the door, didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Looking at Feng Yu making a face as she closed the door, he suddenly felt helpless. After the door closed, Feng Ling turned around and left. However, the moment he turned around, his face turned pale. He bent down slightly and held his right hand. Fresh blood seeped out of his bandaged arm. Feng Ling's face was pale. He forced himself to return to his room. The moment Feng Yu closed the door, tears fell like rain, and he couldn't speak. Brother Ling was injured. Feng Yu wasn't a fool. From the various signs just now, she could see that Feng Ling was injured. How did the incense cover the smell of blood? How did he drink the tea with his left hand? It looked like he was holding it steadily, but the tea was shaking out. When he touched her head, his hand was so stiff, and there was a faintly discernible breath that entered her nose, and Feng Yu pursed her lips tightly. She casually put on a black robe and left her room. She silently hid in a corner outside Feng Ling's room. She heard voices coming from inside the room. Feng Ling was talking to her subordinates. Sec Master, why don't you let young miss know that you're injured? The man asked in confusion as he bandaged Feng Ling's wound. It's just a small injury. Don't let her worry. Feng Ling pursed her lips and said, Besides, if she asks and finds out that I was injured by someone from the southern border, she will definitely blame me. So it's best to keep it a secret. Sec Leader is really good to young Mississippi, that person said with a sigh. Huh? Feng Ling chuckled and said, Who asked me to only have one sister? Feng Yu, who was lying in the corner, fiercely bit her lips, not daring to let herself make the slightest sound. Only when she felt the pain did she regain her senses. Tightly pursing her lips, she silently turned around and groped her way back to her room. Southern border. Southern border again. Would the people of the southern border use this method to warn her again and again as long as she didn't return? Feng Yu's eyes were filled with coldness. Chapter 1880. Looking at the dark sky, she seemed to be making a very difficult decision, but she was so determined. The silence was heart-wrenching. Feng Yu was wearing a cloak and strolling along the small path of the prince's mansion. The cold wind made Feng Yu's body shiver slightly. That petite body was obviously delicate, but it always used its own way to wrap itself around herself. Feng Yu didn't let anyone follow her. She just casually walked along the small path without any choice. Her mind seemed to be in a mess, but it also seemed to be blank. That feeling of silence made Feng Yu frown. When she turned the corner and was about to go out, she saw two people standing on the path. Brother Xiao Bai, I like you a lot. I like you a lot, Yin Yin said with a red face. She stepped forward and tiptoed to plant a kiss on Xiao Bai's cheek. The moment she saw this scene, Feng Yu clearly felt her heart shatter. She raised her hand to cover her chest and abruptly turned around. The corner of her clothes drew a cold arc as Feng Yu left the scene as if she was escaping from something. She used all her strength to run to the side of the corridor and sat down while panting. Suddenly, she felt her face wet. When she raised her hand to touch her face, she suddenly laughed. So it was tears. Feng Yu didn't see that on the other side of the corridor, the corner of that azure blue robe swayed slightly. That slender body just stood there, watching all of this. He watched as Feng Yu wiped away her tears and watched as Feng Yu walked back to her room. He then watched as Feng Yu left the mansion. "Sir, why didn't you stop her?" The man standing next to Xiao Yijuan asked in confusion. "Help me give her something." Xiao Yijuan was silent for a moment. He reached out and took out a very ordinary bottle of medicine and handed it to the man next to him. "Give this." The man frowned in confusion. He didn't give a jade pendant or a sachet. Xiao Yijuan actually gave a bottle of ordinary medicine that couldn't be more ordinary. It would be fine if it was a miracle medicine, but it just had to be this. Just give it to her. Xiao Yijuan didn't seem to think much of it and looked very calm. "Yes." The man nodded slowly and chased out of the mansion. The pitch-black street was extremely deserted in the middle of the night. Feng Yu was walking on the street with a large cloak draped over her body. She had just left the mansion when she heard someone calling out to her from behind. Feng Yu immediately paused with a puzzled expression on her face. "Are you calling me?" Feng Yu looked at the unfamiliar man and frowned slightly. "Miss, this is from my lord." The guard handed the medicine in his hand to Feng Yu. Feng Yu took it with a puzzled expression. "This is..." Feng Yu looked at the medicine and was stunned. "My lord said to be careful on the way." The guard cupped his hands towards Feng Yu, then ran off. Feng Yu's eyes widened. She wanted to ask who your master was, but when she saw the person running away, she frowned. What was the meaning of this? Feng Yu lowered her head slightly and smelled the scent of the medicine. It was the most common medicine, but the smell was familiar. Feng Yu's gaze fell on her palm. Chapter 1881. She immediately thought of Xiao Yijuan, who had helped her bandage her wounds every time. How fun! Feng Yu's eyes were instantly filled with joy. In this world, only this person would miraculously give her a bottle of medicine that was not worth much. But he actually knew that I was leaving. Feng Yu was slightly stunned. She once again turned to look at the dark street. For some reason, at this moment, Feng Yu's heart was filled with mixed feelings. Feng Yu slightly tightened her grip on the bottle of medicine in her hand. "Xiao Yijuan, thank you." Feng Yu's faint words scattered in the wind. That petite figure also disappeared into the night. Within the prince's mansion, there were a few people who did not sleep for the entire night. Feng Yu left. Jing Yu was sleeping on Xiao Chen's lap. Her eyes slightly narrowed as she asked, Xiao Chen was also casually leaning on the soft couch, his hand playing with Jing Yu's hair. She still left in the end. Jing Yu turned over slightly and said very calmly, "Why didn't you stop her?" Xiao Chen heard Jing Yu's words and instantly frowned in confusion. He lowered his head to look at Jing Yu and said, "Feng Yu is going to leave sooner or later. Why should I stop her?" Jing Yu immediately laughed when she heard this. She was happy, but also helpless, and her heart ached for this girl. The news of Feng Yu's departure was probably only known by Jing Yu and Xiao Chen the moment Feng Yu left. The other person who knew was Xiao Yijuan. As for the others, Crown Prince, are you going to apologize to Miss Feng Yu? Interrogation Officer 11 stood behind Xiao Bai and asked very hesitantly. Xiao Bai's lips were tightly pursed as he said, "This is my fault. I should apologize. I told you yesterday to lower your head, Crown Prince, but you refused." Interrogation Officer 11's eyes were filled with amusement as he looked at Xiao Bai's proud little face. "I am the Crown Prince. Besides, isn't today's apology the same?" Xiao Bai frowned unhappily and said, "That girl will definitely be proud." Xiao Bai could almost imagine how Feng Yu would mock him. Although he was extremely unwilling in his heart, he still forced himself to apologize. Walking into the courtyard and looking at the quiet courtyard, Xiao Bai frowned slightly. Could it be that they were still asleep? Why was the courtyard so quiet? 11, go knock on the door. Xiao Bai frowned fiercely. This woman was too good at sleeping. It was almost noon, but she still hadn't woken up. This servant greets the crown prince. Just as interrogation officer 11 was about to go up and knock on the door, he heard the sound of the maidservants kneeling behind him. Xiaobai turned around and saw that the maidservants were holding brooms and wash basins, looking like they were about to clean up. "What are you doing? Did Fengyu send you here?" Xiaobai suddenly frowned and asked. "Replying to your highness, the 9th imperial concubine asked us to come. She said that she wanted us to tidy up this room and lock it up." The head servant replied respectfully, "My mother asked you to come. Isn't Fengyu staying in this room? Why did you lock it up?" Xiao Bai's heart was filled with an uneasy feeling, and his brows furrowed even deeper. "Your Highness, Miss Fengyu left the residence last night." The maidservant was also stunned and looked at Xiao Bai strangely. "What did you say? Fengyu left?" Xiao Bai's eyes suddenly widened, and his face was full of shock. Chapter 1882. "Yes, Miss Fengyu left last night." The maid nodded and replied very seriously. Xiao Bai's heart trembled violently when he heard this, as if he had heard something extremely terrifying. At that moment, his eyes were filled with shock. Beside him, 11th interrogation officer was also slightly taken aback and turned to look at Xiao Bai beside him. How? How could she have left?" Xiao Bai's eyes were filled with disbelief. "When did she leave? How did you know?" Xiao Bai's eyes were filled with coldness as he stared at the maid and asked. This servant heard from the 9th imperial concubine and came to clean. The news of Miss Fengyu's departure is known by the entire residence." The maid lowered her head slightly in fear and said very carefully, "Everyone knows?" Xiao Bai's hands, which were hanging by his side, clenched tightly. Everyone knew, except for him. Fengyu left? Did he just leave without saying a word? He hadn't apologized or said goodbye. How could she leave just like that? Go find mother." Xiao Bai suddenly turned around, and the corners of his black clothes drew a cold arc as he walked outside. When he arrived at Jingyu's courtyard, he was surprised to find that not a single person stopped him. Jingyu sat in the room as if she was waiting for Xiao Bai's arrival. The figure sitting in the room was very calm as she watched Xiao Bai barge in. "Xiao Bai, you're here." Jingyu saw Xiao Bai's arrival and said to Xiao Bai, "Sit." "Mother, Fengyu left? You already knew?" Xiao Bai's face was stiff as he pursed his lips tightly and asked Jingyu. "Yes, I knew." Jingyu knew what Xiao Bai wanted to ask and nodded slowly in silence. She narrowed her eyes and asked Xiao Bai, "So what if I knew? Are you going to blame me for not telling you?" Xiao Bai pursed his lips tightly and didn't speak. "Xiao Bai, you're not an idiot." Jingyu frowned deeply. She looked at Xiao Bai and said, "If you cared about Fengyu even a little, how could you say those words? How could you not know anything about Fengyu's departure?" "Xiao Bai, you've disappointed me." Jingyu looked deeply at Xiao Bai and then slowly stood up. Her golden green eyes looked at Xiao Bai and said, "Think about it carefully." When Xiao Bai came out of Jingyu's room, he looked as if he had lost his soul. His gaze swept across the manor, saw the corridor, and seemed to see Fengyu sitting there alone, swinging her little legs and looking at the sky with narrowed eyes. When he turned his head, he seemed to see the vague figure of a person lying among the leaves. Then he saw the small pavilion, and he seemed to hear his own words ringing in his ears. Everything was because of Fengyu. "Little master." Xiao Bai suddenly held onto a pillar and bent down. Seeing Xiao Bai like this, 11th interrogation officer was shocked and hurried over to support Xiao Bai. Xiao Bai clutched his chest and panted heavily, then slowly straightened up. He turned to 11th interrogation officer and said, "I want to know everything about the Jade Seal." 11th Xing was stunned when he heard this, then slowly lowered his head. He pursed his lips slightly and replied, "Yes." Chapter 1883. After interrogation officer 11 left, Xiao Bai was still sitting in the same spot. He just sat on the chair and remained silent. "Brother Xiao Bai, Brother Xiao Bai." A call came from afar. Xiao Bai turned his head slightly and saw Yun Yun's figure running over. The expression on his face faded a little, and he forced a smile. "Yun, it's you." Xiao Bai nodded slightly and called out, "Brother Xiao Bai, do you know that Sister Fengyu left?" Yin Yun's face was full of sadness as she spoke. I know. Xiaobai lowered his head again and replied, I just found out from father that Sister Feng Yu left just like that. I haven't even thanked her properly for teaching me how to make roast chicken. Yin Yun lowered her head sadly as she spoke. She squatted beside Xiaobai and sighed. Yeah, I haven't thanked her either. Xiaobai replied absent-mindedly. Just as he was about to speak, he suddenly paused and looked at Yin Yun in shock and asked, What did you say? Roast chicken? Yeah. Yin Yun blinked and nodded. Looking at Xiaobai's confused face, she suddenly seemed to have thought of something. She exclaimed, patted her head, and said in a conflicted tone, Big brother Xiaobai, I forgot to tell you. Do you still remember the roast chicken we ate the last time? Yin Yun looked at Xiaobai seriously and said, That roast chicken was made by Sister Feng Yu. I originally wanted to make it myself, but I didn't know how, so Sister Feng Yu made it and showed it to me. Sister Feng Yu said you like to eat roast chicken, so I wanted to learn. Once I learn how, I can make it for you. Yin Yun looked at Xiaobai happily as she spoke. However, when she turned her head, she saw Xiaobai's stiff face. Brother Xiaobai, what's wrong? Yin Yun blinked slightly and asked Xiaobai, why didn't you tell me earlier? Xiaobai's voice was slightly hoarse. I wanted to tell you at the time, but when I saw how happy you were eating, I couldn't bear to interrupt you. Later on, I don't know what I said, but I forgot. Yin Yun lowered her head, feeling wronged. She carefully looked at Xiaobai and said, Brother Xiaobai, you won't blame me, right? Why would I blame you? Xiaobai sneered. He clenched his fist and slammed it on the table. His eyes were cold as he said, I only blame myself for being too stupid. Such a simple logic, yet I never thought of it. Xiaobai suddenly stood up and walked towards his courtyard, leaving Yin Yun sitting there with a shocked expression on her face. She looked at the bloodstains on the table that had been left behind by Xiaobai's powerful punch. Xiaobai strode into the house with large strides. Interrogation Officer 11 appeared before Xiaobai at lightning speed. Young master, I got it. 11th Interrogation Officer nodded slowly at Xiaobai. Speak. Xiaobai's chest tightened as he asked. Miss Feng Yu has returned to Miaojiang. Interrogation 11 said slowly after a moment of silence. Returned to Miaojiang? Xiaobai suddenly stood up. He never thought that Feng Yu would actually return to Miaojiang. Everyone knew that Feng Yu and Feng Ling were from Miaojiang. Yes. Interrogation Officer 11 lowered his head slowly. Chapter 1884. Miss Feng Yu returned to the Miaojiang last night. Today, we received news that half of the Miaojiang people in the imperial city have evacuated. Tint Xing said again and again. What's going on? Xiaobai's face was terrifyingly gloomy. The look in his eyes was terrifying. Master, Madam, and a few other lords are discussing this matter in the meeting hall. If young master wants to know, you can go and take a look, 11th Xing said to Xiaobai after pondering for a while. Let's go. Xiaobai rushed into the meeting hall without thinking. As for this matter, I only found out about it this morning. Feng Ling sat at the side with an extremely ugly expression on her face. Her tightly pursed lips were icy cold. Feng Yu probably left because she heard some rumors. That's why she left. That's unexpected, but it's also expected. Feng Ling lowered her head and said, Everyone probably knows that the attack on the Darking sect was done by the Miaojiang people. To be precise, it was done by the people of the southern Xinjiang. Feng Ling lowered her eyes and said, The Miaojiang is divided into two regions, the southern Xinjiang and the northern Xinjiang. The people in these two regions have always minded their own business. There's a clan leader in each of the two regions. Feng Yu and I are from the southern Xinjiang. Feng Ling's tone was very calm, but her hands that were hanging by her side clenched even tighter. It's probably because I didn't tell you about our parentage. Feng Ling lowered her eyes and said, We are half-siblings. Feng Yu is the daughter of the clan leader of the southern Xinjiang. As for me, I am the illegitimate child of my mother in the northern Xinjiang. When Feng Ling said this, her expression was very calm. It was as if she was talking about something very normal. During the war between the southern border and the northern border, my mother was kidnapped by the people of the northern border, and her body was forcefully taken over. The southern border clan leader risked his life to save his wife, but he discovered that his wife was pregnant. This child is me. Feng Ling slowly lowered his head and replied, I grew up in a perverted environment. As for Feng Yu, Feng Ling paused. She looked up at everyone and said, I escaped from the Miaojiang and took Feng Yu with me. After that, I hid in the continent and established the Darkine sect. Feng Ling said slowly, Isn't Feng Yu the daughter of Nanjiang's clan leader? Why did you bring her out? Jingyu asked curiously. Because that man personally killed our mother in front of Feng Yu. Feng Ling fiercely clenched her fists and said, Ever since I was born, that man hated my mother to the core and used every method to torture her. Being pregnant with Feng Yu was an accident. If I hadn't risked my life to protect her, Feng Yu would have been killed in my mother's womb. Fortunately, I gave birth to Feng Yu, but that man didn't treat us well. Instead, it got worse. In the end, when Feng Yu was 3 years old, that man strangled mother to death in front of the two of us. Feng Ling spoke as if she was telling someone else's story, but Su Yu, who was sitting beside Feng Ling, could clearly see Feng Ling's trembling hands. I took Feng Yu and escaped from that place that disgusted us. Feng Ling lowered her head deeply. Chapter 1885. And we swore that we would never go back. But now, Feng Ling turned to look at the crowd and said, The people of Nanjiang are here. They found the Darkine sect and attacked it. They're threatening me. They want me to hand over the jade. I told you that there were 2 forces from Miaojiang in the imperial city. They are Nanjiang and Beijiang. Now that Feng Yu has gone back, the people from Nanjiang have also left. Feng Ling pursed her lips and said, I don't know why that man suddenly looked for Feng Yu, but I know. Very soon, the northern borderline forces in the imperial city will also retreat because Feng Yu will definitely restrain the northern borderline. Feng Ling's words were like a sharp blade that ruthlessly pierced Xiao Bai's heart. Everyone in the room fell silent. Feng Yu was so young, but she was notorious. Everyone knew that Feng Yu was not to be trifled with. She was a little devil, but no one had ever thought about how Feng Yu became like this. She had gone through so much, but she was still so weak. This devil incarnate was probably the best weapon to protect herself. Only in this way could she ensure that she would not be bullied in the future. Master, Xing 15 strode into the meeting room. He bowed deeply to Xiao Chun and Jingyu and said, I just received news that the people from Miaojiang have all left the imperial city. They left in a hurry. The reason is still unknown. After Xing 15's words, the entire meeting room fell into a dead silence. You may leave. After a long silence, Xiao Chun said faintly. Just as everyone was silent, Xiao Bai suddenly stood up and turned to walk out. Jingyu frowned and called out, Xiao Bai, where are you going? I'm going to bring Feng Yu back. Xiao Bai said firmly. Nonsense. Jingyu frowned and stared at Xiao Bai's back. She said, Do you want to die? There's no need. Just as Xiao Bai was about to speak, a very calm voice sounded from outside the door. I just received news that the son of the Nanjiang clan leader is dead. Find Feng Yu. It is very likely that he will inherit the position of clan leader. Everyone turned their heads and saw Feng Maching and Ling Yong standing at the door. The person who spoke was Feng Maching. Really? Protector Ling? Feng Maching asked Ling Yong calmly after he finished speaking. The son of Nanjiang's clan leader has fallen ill. The doctor said that he might not be able to save him, so he came to look for Feng Yu. Ling Yong explained helplessly. Aha, it's the same meaning. Feng Maching smiled nonchalantly. He turned to look at everyone and said, So there's no need to save this person. The people of Nanjiang won't attack Feng Yu now. Maybe it's not a bad thing for Feng Yu to go back. Feng Maching, it's easy for you to say that. Feng Ling's face instantly darkened. This young master is speaking the truth. Feng Maching smiled faintly and said, It's fine for now. As for the future, that's a matter for the future. Lord Crown Prince, there's no need to rush to save people. Is the news reliable? Xiao Chun, who was sitting on the high seat, asked after a moment of silence. When has news from Constellation Palace ever been wrong? Ling Yong nodded firmly. Good. Xiao Chen nodded slowly. He looked at Xiao Bai, who was still standing, and said, Xiao Bai, sit down. Chapter 1886. Father. Xiao Bai's heart was filled with anxiety and dissatisfaction. But when he saw Xiao Chen's pitch-black eyes, he slowly fell silent. Under Xiao Chen's gaze, Xiao Bai slowly sat down at the side. His eyes were calm as he slowly suppressed the chaotic thoughts in his heart. I came today to bid farewell. Feng Maching indifferently lowered his eyes. He looked at Xiao Chun and Jingyu and said, I'm leaving. For the time being, I haven't thought of where to go or what to do. I also don't know when I'll be back. Feng Maching calmly looked at Xiao Chun and Jingyu and said, If I remember, I'll send you a letter. There's no need to look for me. Xiao Chun, please take care of Sunluo Tower's forces as well. Xiao Chun frowned tightly. His eyes were filled with displeasure. He furrowed his brows tightly and looked at Feng Maching inquisitively. Got it. Finally, after Xiao Chun was silent for a moment, he responded. Feng Maching left just like that. The imperial city seemed to have regained its peace once again. Then, Feng Ling also left. Before Feng Ling left, Jingyu asked Feng Ling if he wanted to go back to Nanjiang to save Feng Yu. I won't. In front of the gate of the prince's residence, Feng Ling looked deeply at Jingyu and said, If I go back now, I'll only harm Feng Yu. She's very smart. She knows what she needs to do. It's just that she has to face the people and things that she doesn't want to face the most. I once promised her that I would let her live a carefree life. Now, I'm going back on my word. Feng Ling shook his head and laughed. His eyes were filled with darkness. Jingyu's heart trembled violently when she saw his departing figure. In the end, she slowly lowered her eyes and remained silent. Feng Ling left with her people. Jingyu turned around and walked into the manor. However, she was slightly stunned when she saw Yun Tian walking towards her. Seeing Yun Tian's posture, Jingyu calmly raised her eyebrows and said, Are you leaving? Yes. Yun Tian slowly nodded and said, Now that we've confirmed that the person who poisoned you isn't from my poison sect, it's all the work of the Miaojiang people. It's time for our family to take our leave. Please forgive us for nagging for so long. You're treating me like an outsider now. Jingyu faintly arched her eyebrows. She looked at Yun Tian and asked, Where do you plan to go after leaving the Tokyo Imperial Palace? I'll take the child to look around. Yun Tian replied with a faint smile. Jingyu faintly arched her eyebrows in response. After the two exchanged some polite words, they parted ways. Jingyu returned to her courtyard. She didn't know why, but after everyone had left, the manor had become so deserted. Xiao Bai bid farewell to Yun Yun in a very proper manner. He even gave Yun Yun quite a few small toys. It seemed that Xiao Bai's regret was that he didn't bid farewell to Feng Yu properly. In the middle of the night, when Yun Yun naively said that she liked him, Xiao Bai was only shocked. There wasn't a trace of joy in his heart, because when he heard Yun Yun say that she liked him, his heart was filled with Feng Yu. Yin I only treat you as a little sister. Xiao Bai helplessly reached out and pressed Yun Yun's head and said, What you like now is only because I treat you well. Don't say such things in the future. I will always treat you well, but I only treat you as a little sister. Yun Yun innocently looked at Xiao Bai and asked, Really? Then big brother Xiao Bai also likes me? Like a little sister to me. Chapter 1887. Yes, I just like how an older brother likes his younger sister, Xiao Bai said with a slight smile. Oh, that's great. I have a brother. Yun Yun immediately cheered and threw herself into Xiao Bai's arms. She planted a loud kiss on Xiao Bai's face and said, I also want an older sister. Tomorrow, I'll go find Sister Feng Yu and tell her that I like her very much. Silly girl. Xiao Bai laughed involuntarily. Just as Xiao Bai was lost in thought, he heard Yun Yun, who was sitting in the carriage, shouting with all her might, Brother Xiao Bai, I'll come find you when I grow up. Xiao Bai raised his hand and waved slowly. He watched the carriage gradually disappear into the distance. After a deep sigh, he turned and walked into the prince's mansion. How good would it be if he could say goodbye to Feng Yu like this? When they first met, it was noisy. Xiao Bai only felt that it was very interesting to tease such a little girl. Later, when he saw how unwilling she was to admit defeat, he admired her in his heart. Then, when did he feel that he was annoyed to have such a chattering person by his side? Xiao Bai couldn't remember clearly. It was probably after Yin Yin appeared. The two extremes were contrasted. One was obedient, sensible, and innocent, while the other killed without batting an eye. She was reckless and didn't care about etiquette. Probably because they had been together for a long time, Xiao Bai always thought that Feng Yu was such a willful person. But he never thought about her past. Xiao Bai stood on the stone path with his hands behind his back and looked at the small pavilion in the distance. He seemed to be thinking about that day again. Why did he say such heartbreaking words without thinking? When Xiao Bai recalled Feng Yu's startled and disappointed eyes at that time, it was like a sharp knife stabbed into his heart. The figure that turned and left was actually a farewell. And the last thing he said to her was not a farewell, but a merciless reprimand. At this moment, Xiao Bai realized how much of a bastard he was. This time, Xiao Bai probably learned his lesson. In the corridor in the distance, Xiao Chun helped Jing Yu to stand on the stone steps and said faintly, "You don't know how to cherish her when she's by your side. When you lose her, it's too late to regret. People are all like that." Jing Yu smiled faintly and turned to look at Xiao Chun. Xiao Chun received Jing Yu's gaze. He calmly raised his eyebrows and asked, "Why are you looking at me like that? The child is hungry. Let's go eat something." Interrogation Officer 1 and Su Yu were the last to bid farewell. "Have you decided?" Xiao Chen sat on a chair and looked at Su Yu and Xing Yi as he asked. "Yes." Xing Yi nodded firmly. Su Yu's eyes were filled with gratitude. "Since you've decided, then go." Xiao Chen calmly narrowed his eyes and said, "Live well in the future." "Yes. Thank you, Master." "Thank you, Madam." Xing Yi's eyes were filled with joy. "It's probably not convenient for us to go to your wedding." Jing Yu smiled faintly and pointed to her big belly. "This little guy isn't allowed. Send a letter when you get married. We'll let Xiao Bai go." Chapter 1888. "Yes, I will." Xing Yi nodded firmly. After bidding farewell to Jing Yu and Xiao Chun, he left with the people of Constellation Palace. The originally lively palace suddenly became quiet. In fact, it had returned to its original state, but for some reason, it suddenly became so quiet. Ever since this time, Xiao Bai seemed to have hardened his heart to himself. He practiced martial arts very hard, and when he did things, he became more and more like Xiao Chun. Jing Yu was very worried about this, but Xiao Chun was very satisfied. He praised Xiao Bai, saying that this time, Xiao Bai was finally a little more presentable. On the second day after Xing Yu left, Fang Zicheng sent a letter saying that something had happened at home and he had to rush back. He didn't even say goodbye before leaving. This made Xiao Chun worried for a long time, and he specially sent people to investigate. It was just that his father was seriously ill, and there wasn't any big trouble, so he was relieved. But why didn't Fang Zicheng come to say goodbye? Jing Yu didn't care, and after a while, Xiao Chun also didn't take it to heart. "Sister-in-law, have you finished learning everything in this restaurant?" Time passed quickly, and in the blink of an eye, it was October. In another month, Lu Miaochio's delivery date would be, and everyone in the palace was paying attention to this matter. Jing Yu's belly was also getting bigger by the day. At this moment, she was sitting in the room with a big belly, flipping through the account book in her hand. She casually looked at Feng Ju and said, "Is this account book made by you? I try to write it, but I don't know how it is." Feng Ju slightly raised his eyebrows and slowly smiled at Jing Yu and said, Help me take a look. Is this good?" "Sister-in-law, you are really amazing." Jing Yu's eyes were full of joy as she said, "Although this account book has some flaws, it is very good that it can be done like this." "Sister-in-law, I really didn't misjudge you." You're joking." Feng Ju said shyly. "There are still many things I'm lacking. I'm waiting for you to teach me a thing or two." Jing Yu smiled faintly and spoke for Feng Ju for a long time in a very gentle manner. When Feng Ju understood, he repeatedly agreed and went out of the courtyard. As soon as he went out of the courtyard, he bumped into Xiao Chun, who had just returned. After talking for a while at the courtyard gate, he turned and left. He's back. When Jingyu saw that Xiao Chun had returned, she calmly raised her eyebrows and asked, "Did you meet sister-in-law at the entrance?" "Yes." Xiao Chun nodded and said, "It's just right to leave the matters of this restaurant to sister-in-law. You're probably thinking that as long as I'm not the one taking care of it, it's fine, right?" Jingyu stared at Xiao Chun with incomparable disdain. Her eyes were full of disdain as she said, "It's too flat outside now. Can you let me go out for a walk? Staying in the palace all day long, I'm going to get sick." Jingyu looked at Xiao Chun with eyes full of hidden bitterness. Xiao Chun frowned when he heard this. He frowned and said, "Tomorrow, I'll take you to a place." "And where are we going?" Jingyu thought that Xiao Chun would definitely be like before and directly refuse. She even decided that she would definitely rely on Xiao Chun to go out. She didn't expect that Xiao Chun would suddenly agree so easily this time. Suddenly, her heart was filled with curiosity. She reached out and pulled Xiao Chun's sleeve and asked, "Where are you taking me?" Chapter 1889. You'll know tomorrow. Have a good rest now. Xiao Chun helped Jingyu up and said, "Yin Xiao told you that your feet have been swollen for the past few days. Are you feeling better now?" "Yes, I'm much better these few days." Jingyu nodded and said, "But the child in my stomach has been making a lot of noise recently." Jingyu said as she lifted her belly slightly. Looking at her big belly, she reached out and touched it. She said with hesitation, "I don't know if it's a boy or a girl. Look at how noisy it is now. What will it look like when it's born?" "That's true." Xiao Chun nodded in agreement. "Ayaya. Look, he's kicking me again." Jingyu cried out in surprise. She grabbed Xiao Chun's hand and placed it on her stomach. The vibration from her stomach made Xiao Chun's eyes fill with surprise. When Jingyu gave birth to Little Potato, he didn't see Little Potato making a lot of noise. "It's good to be lively." Xiao Chun kissed Jingyu's belly and said, "I made you suffer." Uff. Jingyu looked at Xiao Chun and laughed. She looked at Xiao Chun and said, "Have you thought of a name for the child? I don't know if it's a boy or a girl. Why don't we call it Watermelon? Little Watermelon." Jingyu smiled and touched her belly with satisfaction. She said, "It's so naughty. It suits you very well." Xiao Chun's face darkened. Jingyu originally wanted to say a small ball, but the ancient people didn't seem to know what a ball was. She didn't know why she thought of a watermelon from a ball. She nodded with satisfaction as she thought about it. "My brother is a vegetable. As for you, just be a fruit." Jingyu looked up at Xiao Chun and said, "What do you think? Don't you think it's great?" Xiao Chun was silent. He looked at Jingyu and said, "As long as you're happy." "Ha ha ha." Jingyu looked at Xiao Chun's helpless expression and laughed happily. The room was filled with laughter. After Jingyu decided the name of the child in her belly, she called it Little Watermelon. Xiao Chun sat beside Jingyu with a faint smile in his eyes. The next morning, Jingyu was completely awakened by the little watermelon in her belly. "This brat, can't you let me sleep properly?" Jingyu hugged her belly and frowned. Xiao Chun was also awakened. He frowned and lifted the blanket. A pair of dark eyes stared deeply at Jingyu's belly. Under Jingyu's surprised gaze, Xiao Chun stared deeply at Jingyu's belly and said, "Be quiet." Jingyu was dumbfounded. She looked at her belly silently. It seemed it was really quiet. "How is it?" Xiao Chun turned to look at Jingyu and asked. It's quiet." Jingyu nodded silently. "Then sleep for a while more," Xiao Chun said as he calmly covered Jingyu with the blanket. He hugged Jingyu and wanted to sleep again. After being tormented like this, Jingyu couldn't sleep no matter what. After lying on the bed for a while, her waist and back were aching. In the end, she chose to get up. The weather in October was already quite cold. Chapter 1890. Xiao Chun insisted that Jingyu wear more clothes before he agreed to let Jingyu go out. Everyone in the Wang residence had already received Xiao Chun's orders and had prepared clothes for the carriage. Jingyu was stunned when she saw the prepared clothes and whatnot. "Why did you prepare clothes? Could it be that the clothes will get dirty?" Jingyu curiously turned her head to look at Xiao Chun. She couldn't help but wonder where Xiao Chun was bringing her to. We're going to stay outside for a few days, Xiao Chun said as he raised his eyebrows. Huh? Staying outside? Jing Yu's eyes lit up, and a look of interest appeared in her heart. Let's go. Xiao Chun didn't say anything else. After helping Jing Yu into the carriage, they left. Jing Yu couldn't understand why Xiao Chun didn't bring a single servant. She turned her head to look at Xiao Chun and said, "Isn't it too inconvenient to not bring a single servant?" "It isn't," Xiao Chun calmly replied. Jing Yu looked at Xiao Chun's expression and became even more curious. The carriage slowly moved to the streets, and Xiao Chun sat by the side reading a book. He said, "There are some roads to travel. If you are tired, you can rest for a while." "Okay," Jing Yu replied. She was really tired. Then, as the carriage swayed, she leaned against Xiao Chun and fell asleep. She didn't know how long she had slept during the rocking. When she woke up again, the carriage was still moving. However, she couldn't hear the noise around her. It was very quiet. Jing Yu raised her eyebrows slightly. "Where did we fall?" Jing Yu sat up slightly, and only then did she see the clothes covering her body. Outside the city. When Xiao Chun saw that Jing Yu had woken up, he covered Jing Yu with the clothes and replied calmly, "We are outside the city." Jing Yu was surprised. She reached out and pulled open the curtain. The first thing she saw was the quiet forest outside the carriage and the sound of the carriage wheels rolling on the muddy road. Jing Yu looked at the forest. She didn't know why, but she suddenly had a feeling that she had been here before. "Don't look. You will know when we arrive." Before Jing Yu could understand, she was stopped by Xiao Chun. He handed the water bottle in his hand to Jing Yu and said, "Drink some water." "Okay," Jing Yu calmly replied. After chatting with Xiao Chun for a while, she felt the carriage stopped and Xing San's voice. "Master, madam, we have arrived. Let's go." Xiao Chun got off the carriage first. He then turned around and extended his hand to Jing Yu. Jing Yu supported her big belly and carefully got off the carriage. When she stood on the muddy ground and saw the familiar house, her eyes widened. "So you wanted to bring me here?" Jing Yu's eyes were filled with surprise. She looked at the house and smiled. Looking at the house built in the forest, who would have thought that there would be a house in the depths of the forest? Moreover, this house was even more dilapidated than the last time Jing Yu saw it. How could Jing Yu be unfamiliar with this house? When Xiao Chun was poisoned, Jing Yu found out about it and followed him here. After that, Xiao Chun told Jing Yu that he was poisoned in this house. It was such a long time ago, but it felt like it was happening now. Chapter 1891. Jing Yu's eyes were filled with nostalgia. She stared deeply at the door that was covered with fallen leaves and watched as the tightly shut door slowly opened. The door was covered with a layer of dust, and the black-clothed guards filed out. This scene was so familiar. "Xiao Chun, why did you suddenly think of bringing me here?" Jing Yu's eyes were filled with warmth as she turned to look at Xiao Chun and asked, "I thought of it, so I brought you here." Xiao Chun nodded seriously. He held Jing Yu's hand and said, "Back then, I didn't let you take good care of this residence. Now, we will stay here for a few days. There is no one here, and you don't have to pay attention to your appearance. There are secret guard within a 5-mile radius, so there won't be any danger," Xiao Chun said with satisfaction. "Whatever you want to do, this king will accompany you." When Jing Yu heard Xiao Chun's words, a faint smile appeared in her eyes. She turned to look at Xiao Chun and said, "How do you want me to thank you for being so considerate?" Xiao Chun seemed to think carefully when he heard Jing Yu's words. He arched his eyebrows and looked at Jing Yu and said, "The best way to thank you is to accompany this king until we grow old together. Are you willing?" "When did you become so glib-tongued?" When Jing Yu heard Xiao Chun's words, a faint blush appeared on her face. She looked at Xiao Chun with a smile and asked, "I'm glib-tongued only to you," Xiao Chun said seriously. Jing Yu suddenly smiled. As the two of them spoke, they had already walked toward the door. Jing Yu looked at the layer of dust on the outside. She couldn't tell what it was like inside. She was worried that it would take some time to clean up. But to his surprise, what he saw when he walked in was completely different from what he had imagined. This has been cleaned." Jing Yu stared at the situation in front of her and asked, "Of course." Xiao Chun nodded calmly. When he turned around, and saw Jing Yu's surprised expression. He smiled faintly and asked, "Did you think that the inside of this room is the same as the outside, full of fallen leaves and dust?" "Yes." Jing Yu blinked and said, "It's been so long, but it's still so clean. Why does it look like it has been cleaned every day?" "Of course I clean it every day." Xiao Chun turned to point at the two men in black standing outside the door and said, "They have never left this place. They are the ones who clean this place every day." "Then why isn't the door cleaned? Don't tell me none of them are going out?" Jing Yu frowned and asked. Xiao Chun frowned silently. He raised his hand and pinched Jing Yu's face and said, "They never go out through the door." Jing Yu slapped away Xiao Chen's hand. When she turned around, she saw one of the guards in black suddenly jump over the wall and disappear. Looking at this scene, Jing Yu frowned. They really didn't take the usual route. No wonder the door was covered in dust. No one used it at all. Jing Yu was deeply suspicious. Was the wall cleaner than the door? The black-clothed guards packed up all the things that Jing Yu and Xiao Chen brought. Only then did Jing Yu realize that there were actually women among these black-clothed guards. Their faces were covered, and they were dressed in black. If one didn't look carefully, one wouldn't know that they were women. Chapter 1892. The things in the room were tidied up, and the candles were lit. When night came, the surroundings seemed to have sunk into silence. Jing Yu sat in the room and looked at the simple decorations of the room. It looked very ordinary. However, these things were very expensive. Not to mention the other things, just the tea set was of high quality. Jing Yu slowly sat down on the soft couch. She turned her head slightly to look at Xiao Chun and asked, "Why did you bring me here?" Xiao Chun raised his eyebrows slightly and looked at Jing Yu. "Are you not satisfied?" "That's not it." Jing Yu shook her head slightly and smiled. "This house is very quiet. If I can stay here for a long time, I will feel at ease. However, I was thinking that you haven't been here for a long time. Why did you suddenly come here today?" "Yes." Xiao Chun nodded slowly and calmly. He turned his head to look at Jing Yu and said, "I am tired of staying in the royal city. Since you want to relax, I will naturally take you far away. However, I am afraid that there is something going on in the royal palace, so we cannot go too far. It is not good for you and the child." After thinking for a while, I thought of this place. Xiao Chun said to Jing Yu calmly, "In the past, I often came here. However, after you appeared, I did not come here often." Xiao Chun put down the book in his hand. He walked to the window and opened it. "Every time I come here, I feel at ease. I can let go of all my guard and uneasiness. This place can protect you and protect me." Xiao Chun narrowed his eyes and said, "If something happens in the future, you must remember to hide here. No one will be able to hurt you." Xiao Chen's words were very deep. Jing Yu tightly frowned and looked at Xiao Chen's back. She propped herself up and walked over to hold Xiao Chen's hand. She originally wanted to hug Xiao Chun, but it was too inconvenient with her belly. She could only go forward and hold Xiao Chen's hand. There was a faint smile in her eyes, and she said seriously, "Will you let me be alone outside?" "Of course not." Xiao Chun looked at Jing Yu. His eyes were filled with deep affection. His gaze when he looked at Jing Yu was very gentle. The best thing about this house was that it was quiet. The quiet Jing Yu also felt comfortable. After chatting with Xiao Chun for a while, she lay down on the soft bed. Her eyes were filled with gentleness. She looked at Xiao Chen's handsome face and closed her eyes in satisfaction. In her dream, Jing Yu seemed to see herself, the children, and Xiao Chun living happily together. It was also like this house built in the forest. It was simple but very warm. Yin Jian and Yin Feng were also there. Everything was so beautiful. However, all this beauty was shattered in an instant. Jing Yu saw her body disappear bit by bit. Her ears were filled with Xiao Chen's crazy roars and the children's sharp cries. Jing Yu's eyes were filled with panic. She could clearly feel the pair of golden-green eyes disappearing. All the blood in her body, even her soul, disappeared. She saw Xiao Chun and the children screaming helplessly. That kind of heart-wrenching pain made Jing Yu's body tremble violently. She suddenly opened her eyes. Jing Yu's heart was beating so fast. She raised her hand to touch her face. Her face was already covered in tears. What's wrong? Xiaochen looked at Jingyu and frowned slightly. He was very puzzled. Chapter 1893. Jingyu wanted to speak, but the moment she opened her mouth, she suddenly felt a sharp pain in her heart. That feeling was so clear that Jingyu clutched her heart and screamed. That piercing pain only lasted for a moment before it disappeared. Jingyu's golden-green eyes turned black in an instant, then back to golden-green again. It was as if nothing had happened. If Jingyu hadn't felt that pain so deeply, she might have thought that she was hallucinating. What's wrong with you? Xiaochen looked at Jingyu in shock. I'm fine. Jingyu panted slowly. There was a faint, solemn look in her eyes. She reached out to press on her chest and turned to look at Xiaochen. When she saw that Xiaochen's eyes were filled with worry, she smiled faintly. I had a very bad dream, Jingyu said to Xiaochen. Your eyes are disappearing more and more times. Xiaochen stared deeply at Jingyu as he spoke. When Jingyu heard Xiaochen's words, she was momentarily stunned. She reached out to touch the corners of her eyes. There was a hint of worry in her eyes. The other pupil will be transferred to the next generation. Little Potato doesn't have the other pupil, and now, Jingyu said as she gently caressed her stomach. Her eyes were filled with worry as she said in a deep voice, all the signs are pointing to the fact that the other pupil is the other pupil. Little Watermelon is very likely to be the next generation's other pupil. When Little Watermelon is born, the other pupil in my body will disappear. Jingyu pursed her lips tightly. She thought about the dream last night. In the dream, her other pupil disappeared along with her body. That disappearance seemed to be a sign of something that made Jingyu so uneasy. If the other pupil disappeared, would Jingyu disappear as well? This kind of disappearance wasn't death. It was true disappearance. What kind of disappearance was it? Jingyu was lost in thought. Her palms were cold. Just as Jingyu was panicking, Xiaochen reached out to hold her hand. He looked deeply at Jingyu and said, don't let your thoughts run wild. When Jingyu heard Xiaochen's words, her heart trembled slightly. Then, she suppressed the panic in her heart. Okay, Jingyu's heart was absent, but she was very calm. After such a torment, she couldn't sleep anymore. The sky outside wasn't bright yet. Jingyu and Xiaochen lay on the bed and talked for a while. Then, they got up to wash up. Although there weren't any servant girls here, the secret guards still made the necessary preparations. As for dressing, Xiaochen helped Jingyu dress. His considerate actions made Jingyu's eyes fill with a faint warmth. The air outside was very fresh. The chirping of the birds was very pleasant. It was as if Jingyu had come to the countryside. Jingyu was still thinking about where Xiaochen would bring her. After breakfast, he brought Jingyu to the back of the mountain. Where are we going? Jingyu looked curiously at Xiaochen and asked. You'll know when we get there. Xiaochen still didn't say. After the carriage traveled for a while, it stopped. Jingyu stepped off the carriage and stepped on the muddy ground. This was a small path in the forest. Xiaochen carefully supported Jingyu as they walked down. Chapter 1894. Jingyu finally saw the situation outside. There was a field in the distance. What entered her eyes were fields and the people working in the fields. Where is this? Jingyu opened her eyes slightly and turned to look at Xiaochen as she asked. This is a place where the people live outside the city. Xiaochen calmly turned his head to look at Jingyu and said, I didn't bring you here before. I only found out later. Since you wanted to come out for a walk, I brought you here. I'm being too rude. Jingyu glared at Xiaochen with hidden bitterness. Seeing that her hair wasn't tied up and she was dressed casually, she glared fiercely at Xiaochen. This person said that there was no need to dress up. Now that there were so many people, her appearance was really... This prince thinks it's quite good. Xiaochen turned his head to look at Jingyu and calmly said, When I first brought you back to the imperial city, you weren't like this. You were so lawless and didn't care about etiquette. Why do you care so much now? Xiaochen smiled as he looked at Jingyu. At that time, I didn't care about etiquette. If I was pushed too far, I would have returned to the forest alone. Jingyu glared at Xiao Chun and said, "Was it the same now? I still have the title of the 9th Imperial Concubine. No matter what, I can't just come out like this, right? How embarrassing. I'm embarrassing you," Jingyu said as she glared at Xiao Chun with grievance. "No." Xiao Chun calmly raised his eyebrows and said, "The people here won't think too much. That's good." As Xiao Chun spoke, he held Jingyu's hand as they walked on the field. Looking at the people working in the field, he said calmly, "This field is filled with taro. Now that the taro is ripe, they're dug out to be sold. Look, they're in this bamboo basket." "Okay." Jingyu slowly nodded. She recognized this. Looking at the freshly dug out taro, Jingyu suddenly felt hungry. She stood up and blinked her eyes at Xiao Chun and said, "We haven't eaten taro in a long time. Why don't we buy some back to eat?" "Of course." Xiao Chun smiled faintly and waved his hand at Third Xing. Third Xing received the signal and shouted at the people working in the field, asking if the taro was for sale. Instantly, a young girl ran over. "Master, do you want to buy taro or taro?" When the young girl walked over and saw Xiao Chun and Jingyu, her eyes were filled with amazement. Xiao Chun and Jingyu's appearances were simply heavenly. After asking this, she was stunned. She turned to look at Jingyu. Seeing Jingyu's golden green eyes, her eyes widened. She plopped down on her knees and shouted, "Greetings to the 9th Emperors and the 9th Imperial Concubine." "Ah, it's the 9th Emperors and the 9th Imperial Concubine. Let's go take a look. Let's go take a look." The greeting immediately attracted the attention of the people who were working in the fields. They all looked at Jingyu and Xiao Chun. A few children even ran over and looked at Xiao Chun and Jingyu with amazement. "Are you the Imperial Concubine with different pupils? Your eyes are so beautiful." The children's innocent words rang out. Jingyu's eyes were instantly dyed with a faint smile. This king is only bringing the Imperial Concubine here for a leisurely stroll. "Everyone, there's no need to stand on ceremony. Go to your work." Xiao Chen's eyes showed a rare gentleness. "You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.